She woke up to the soft sound of the wind outside and the faint creaking of the old wooden floor. The morning light was just beginning to peek through the curtains, painting the room with a gentle glow. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet. The house was calm, almost too calm, like it had been asleep for a long time. Beside her, the bed was empty. Her husband was already up, likely in the kitchen, making his usual morning coffee. She sighed softly and rubbed her eyes, stretching before getting out of bed. For as long as she could remember, mornings had been a quiet time in their home. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, but a quiet that spoke of distance. Her husband had always been a man of few words, even in the early days of their marriage. At first it had felt mysterious, even charming, but over the years the silence had grown heavier. 15 years had passed since she could remember him giving her a hug in the morning, or asking how she slept with genuine interest. 15 years of routine and distance, filled with polite conversations and shared responsibilities, but rarely with warmth. She pulled on her slippers and walked down the hallway, the dog trailing behind her with its usual cheerful bounce. The dog was a bundle of energy, a golden retriever with a shiny coat and eyes that seemed to hold all the joy in the world. From the moment they had brought him home, he had been a source of constant companionship. Unlike her husband, he never seemed distant. He wagged his tail at the simplest things, followed her everywhere, and somehow knew when she needed comfort. "Good morning, buddy," she said softly, bending down to scratch behind his ears. He responded with a happy bark, nudging her hand with his nose, making her laugh despite the heaviness she sometimes felt. The dog had a way of breaking through the quiet sadness that often lingered in the house. He didn't judge, didn't demand anything, and yet he filled a space that had been empty for far too long. As she entered the kitchen, the familiar smell of coffee greeted her. Her husband was there, standing by the counter, pouring his coffee into a mug. He looked up and nodded, a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice low and steady as always. She returned the greeting, her smile a little forced, hiding the longing she often felt for something more. Something simple, like affection or attention. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The dog sat patiently by her feet, occasionally letting out a soft whine as if reminding her that he was there, that he cared. She reached down and scratched his ears, feeling the warmth of his fur under her fingers. It was a small comfort, but one that she had come to cherish more than she could put into words. In moments like these, she felt seen, even if it wasn't by the person she had once dreamed of connecting with. After breakfast, she decided to take a walk outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and dew. The dog bounded ahead, his tail wagging furiously, his energy infectious. She laughed, feeling a spark of joy she hadn't felt in a long time. Walking with him, she could forget the years of quiet distance. She could just be herself, talking aloud, sharing thoughts without expecting a response, yet feeling heard in the way he looked at her. Her husband didn't join them. He rarely did. He preferred to stay in the house reading the newspaper or working on some task. She didn't mind so much anymore. She had learned to find happiness in the small things, in the presence of her dog, in the little moments that reminded her life wasn't completely devoid of warmth. As they walked along the narrow path behind their house, she noticed the way the dog seemed to look at her more intently today. He paused, tilting his head, ears perked, as if he understood something she hadn't yet realized. She knelt down to pet him, noticing the unusual seriousness in his eyes. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. He barked once, low and insistent, then ran a few steps ahead and looked back at her as if beckoning her to follow. Curiosity piqued. She followed him, wondering what had captured his attention. The path led to a small clearing by the trees, a place they often visited, but today it felt different. The dog sat down, watching her with a steady gaze. She knelt beside him again, brushing her hands through the fallen leaves. Something about the moment felt meaningful, though she couldn't put it into words. It was as if the dog was trying to communicate something beyond the usual playful gestures. Something heartfelt. She remembered the early days of their marriage, how she had longed for such gestures from her husband. A gentle touch on the shoulder, a smile that lingered, a hand held for comfort. Those moments had become rare over the years, replaced by routine and distance. She had learned to live with it, to adjust her expectations, but there was always a quiet longing beneath the surface. The dog seemed to sense this. He nudged her hand with his nose, then rested his head on her lap. She stroked his fur, feeling a warmth that went beyond the physical. It was the kind of comfort she had missed, the kind that made her heart feel a little lighter. She sighed, closing her eyes for a moment, letting herself be fully present in the simple act of being with him. When she opened her eyes, she noticed the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting patterns on the ground. The dog looked up at her, eyes bright and attentive as if he were waiting for something. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile, feeling a connection that was rare and precious. In that moment, she realized just how much she cherished him, not just for his playfulness, but for the quiet understanding and love he offered without asking for anything in return. The walk continued, each step accompanied by the dog's cheerful presence. He ran ahead, then returned, always keeping her in sight. She laughed at his antics, feeling a sense of joy she hadn't experienced in years. The world seemed lighter, the air sweeter, and the simple companionship of her dog filled a void she had long accepted as permanent. As they returned home, she thought about how life had changed over the years. The distance between her and her husband was a reality she had learned to accept, but the dog's presence reminded her that love could exist in many forms. It didn't always have to come in the ways she had expected or hoped for. Sometimes it came in the quiet nudges, the soft whines, the unwavering loyalty of a companion who never turned away. Back inside, she watched her husband moving about the kitchen, still distant, still absorbed in his routine. She didn't feel anger or frustration anymore, only a quiet acceptance. Life was what it was, and she had found a source of love and connection that was steady and true. Her dog curled up at her feet, resting his head on her shoe, and she felt a surge of gratitude. In this small, ordinary moment, there was warmth, there was joy, and there was a love that, though different from what she had imagined, was no less real. She knelt down to give her dog a final scratch behind the ears before moving on with her day. He wagged his tail happily, looking up at her with those bright, knowing eyes. She whispered softly, "You're my favorite part of every day, you know that?" He barked once in response, as if agreeing, and she laughed, feeling a lightness in her chest that hadn't been there in a long time. The morning continued, filled with small tasks and quiet moments. Yet beneath it all, a sense of anticipation lingered, subtle but undeniable. Something about the way the dog had acted, the way he had seemed almost intentional in his gestures, left her with a feeling that something meaningful was about to happen. She didn't know what it was yet, but she felt ready to notice, ready to embrace whatever it might be. In the midst of the ordinary, she found herself cherishing the extraordinary, not in grand events or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet presence of a dog who had learned, perhaps instinctively, to offer the love and attention she had longed for in ways that mattered most. And as she went about her day, she carried that feeling with her, a warm, subtle joy that whispered of connection, care, and the unexpected ways love could appear, even after 15 long years of waiting. The next day started much like the one before. She woke up to the faint sound of the wind and the soft shuffle of her dog moving around the room. The sunlight poured gently through the curtains, touching the walls with warmth. The house was quiet, but it felt different somehow. There was a subtle energy in the air, a sense that something unusual might happen today. She stretched and yawned, letting herself sink into the calmness before beginning her day. Her husband was already in the kitchen when she walked in as usual. He nodded at her, gave a brief morning, and went back to his newspaper. His presence was steady but distant, a reminder of the emotional gap that had stretched between them for years. She didn't feel frustration this time. She had long accepted that his way of showing love was quiet, minimal, and sometimes almost invisible. The dog, however, was different. The moment he saw her, he perked up with his usual excitement, tail wagging furiously. He ran around in small circles before settling at her feet, looking up at her with his bright, eager eyes. She knelt to scratch behind his ears, and he leaned into her touch, nudging her hand with his nose as if trying to communicate something she couldn't yet understand. Breakfast was simple, just toast and coffee, but the dog made it special. He lay beside her chair, glancing at her occasionally, tilting his head as if waiting for her to notice something. She smiled at him, a soft laugh escaping her lips, and he barked lightly, like a small, cheerful answer. There was a sense of companionship in these moments that she had come to treasure. He noticed her moods, always attentive, always present, and sometimes it felt like he understood things that her husband didn't or couldn't. After breakfast, she decided to go outside again, hoping to enjoy the crisp morning air and the quiet of the garden. The dog bounded ahead, circling around her, jumping playfully, making her laugh. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the leaves crunched under their feet as they walked along the small path behind the house. She let herself enjoy the moment, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. As they reached the clearing by the trees, the dog suddenly stopped and looked back at her. His gaze was different today, not playful but serious. He nudged her hand with his nose, then ran a few steps ahead and stopped, glancing back again. There was a sense of urgency in his actions, a way of asking her to follow without using words. She stood up, curious, and walked toward him. He led her to a spot they didn't usually visit. It was near an old oak tree, its branches stretching wide above them. The dog sat down, looking at her expectantly. She knelt beside him, brushing her hands through the fallen leaves. Something about his behavior made her heart beat a little faster. It was unusual for him to act so deliberate, so attentive, and it left her feeling a mix of curiosity and warmth. She remembered the mornings with her husband long ago, the small gestures of care and affection she had once hoped for but had gradually stopped expecting. A gentle touch, a thoughtful word, a shared moment of laughter in the quiet of the morning. Those small acts had disappeared over time, replaced by routine, responsibility, and a kind of distant politeness. She had learned to adjust, to fill the gaps with her own activities, with friends, and, increasingly, with the companionship of her dog. But today, the dog seemed to be trying to do something different. He rested his head on her lap, eyes shining, and nudged her hand again. She stroked his fur, feeling a warmth and connection that went beyond simple companionship. It was a kind of attention that carried intention, care, and awareness. In a strange way, it reminded her of what she had been missing from her husband for so many years. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're going to spoil me, you know that?" she whispered. He barked gently as if agreeing, then leaned closer. She couldn't help but feel a little emotional. There was something powerful in his gestures, something pure and unassuming. No words were needed. His actions spoke louder than anything she had experienced in recent years. The morning continued with small but meaningful moments. The dog played fetch with a stick, ran around in the leaves, then returned to sit beside her again. She noticed the way he would glance at her after each action, as if gauging her reaction, seeking approval, or simply wanting her attention. It was a subtle form of communication, one that seemed almost intentional, almost human in its awareness. As they walked back toward the house, she found herself thinking about the nature of love and care. It didn't always come in grand gestures or passionate words. Sometimes it came quietly, persistently through small acts that showed presence, attention, and understanding. Her dog's actions today reminded her of that. The playful nudges, the careful attention, the gentle closeness. They were expressions of love in their purest form. When they reached the kitchen, she noticed her husband glancing at them from across the room. He raised his eyebrows slightly, perhaps noticing the unusual behavior of the dog, but he said nothing. She smiled to herself, realizing that these moments didn't need his acknowledgement. The joy she felt didn't depend on him. It was enough that her dog cared, enough that she could experience a sense of connection that had been missing for so long. She sat at the table, the dog curling up beside her chair. She reached down to scratch behind his ears again, and he leaned into her touch, closing his eyes in contentment. It was a peaceful moment, one that made her heart feel lighter and warmer. She realized that she had been longing for this feeling for years, not necessarily from her husband, but from someone, something that could offer attention, care, and love without expectation. And here it was, in the form of her loyal companion. Later in the day, as she went about her chores, the dog followed closely, always attentive. When she paused to water the plants, he sat patiently by her side, watching her with curious eyes. When she opened the laundry to fold clothes, he lay down beside her, nudging her hand occasionally as if reminding her that he was there. She began to notice patterns in his behavior, small gestures that seemed designed to comfort her, to be close, and to share her day. In the afternoon, she took a break and sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The dog jumped up beside her, resting his head on her lap once more. She stroked his fur, feeling a sense of gratitude that filled her heart. He didn't just provide companionship, he provided emotional support, a reminder that she was not alone in the house, that she was valued, and that she mattered. She smiled, realizing how much she had come to rely on him for these small yet profoundly meaningful gestures. As the evening approached, the dog's behavior remained unusual. He seemed more attentive than ever, following her from room to room, sitting closer, nudging her gently when she stopped to pause. She began to wonder if he was sensing something in her, some unspoken need for care and attention that had been overlooked for years. She felt a mix of surprise and appreciation for his instincts, marveling at how a simple act from a dog could touch her heart so deeply. Her husband, meanwhile, continued his evening routine, reading or watching television. He rarely interacted beyond necessary words, and yet she didn't feel upset. She had learned to accept his way of being. The contrast between his distant behavior and the dog's attentiveness was stark, but it also made her appreciate the small acts of love around her. She realized that connection could come from unexpected places, and sometimes the simplest gestures could mean more than years of routine and habit. As night fell, she prepared for bed, and the dog jumped up onto the bed beside her. He rested his head on her shoulder, nudging her gently as if to say, "I'm here, and I care." She held him close for a moment, feeling a deep sense of comfort that had been missing for so long. In that quiet intimacy, she realized how much she cherished these moments, how much she valued the love and attention that came without condition, without expectation, and without judgment. She drifted off to sleep that night with the dog curled beside her, his warmth a gentle reminder of the connection and love she had found in the most unexpected place. Something had shifted inside her, an awareness that love could exist in many forms, that care could come quietly, persistently, and without demand. And for the first time in a long while, she felt fully seen, fully valued, and fully cherished not by her husband, but by a loyal companion who had taught her the power of simple, heartfelt gestures even in the quiet of the night. As the house settled into silence, she felt a spark of hope. The dog's attentiveness, his gentle care, and his unspoken love had opened a door she thought had long been closed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she was ready to notice, to cherish, and to embrace the small moments that made life meaningful. And as she held him close, she whispered softly, "Thank you for seeing me, for being here, and for reminding me what it feels like to be cherished." The dog gave a soft, contented sigh, and she knew deep down that he understood. The next morning, she woke with a sense of quiet anticipation. The house felt alive in a subtle, comforting way, as if something small but meaningful was about to unfold. She rubbed her eyes and stretched, noticing the golden sunlight streaming through the curtains. Her dog, as always, was already awake, sitting at the foot of the bed with alert eyes that seemed to hold a secret. He wagged his tail when he saw her, and she smiled, feeling the warmth of his presence immediately. Her husband was still asleep, as he usually was in the mornings, lost in his own quiet routine. She didn't think much about it anymore. Years ago, she might have felt the ache of his distance, the absence of gentle gestures or loving words. But over time, she had learned to find comfort in other forms of connection, in the things that reminded her she was seen, valued, and loved, even if differently than she had imagined. And her dog had become a steady source of that comfort, a presence that reminded her life could still be full of small but powerful moments. She slipped out of bed quietly, letting the dog follow her as she moved through the house. He seemed unusually attentive today, keeping pace with her, occasionally nudging her hand or brushing against her legs. There was an intentionality in his behavior that made her heart lift. She wondered what he was thinking, what he wanted to show her. It was as though he knew she needed something she hadn't had for a long time, a small reminder that love could be expressed simply and still mean everything. After breakfast, she decided to take a longer walk outside, enjoying the crisp air and the quiet beauty of the morning. The dog bounded ahead with his usual energy, circling back to check on her, then running ahead again, his tail wagging like a banner of joy. She laughed as he darted through the fallen leaves, the sound of his playful barks filling the air. But there was something different today. He paused frequently, looking back at her with steady, thoughtful eyes, almost as if he were trying to communicate something important. As they reached the clearing near the old oak tree, the dog stopped and sat down, his gaze fixed on her. He nudged her hand gently, then ran a few steps ahead before turning back again. She knelt beside him, brushing leaves from her coat, and realized that he seemed to be guiding her, leading her to a place where something significant was about to happen. Her heart began to beat a little faster, curiosity mingling with a quiet excitement. For a moment she watched him closely, noticing the way he held himself, He wasn't just playful or energetic. Today, his actions carried meaning. He seemed to sense her emotions, her longing for care and attention, and he wanted to give her something she had been missing for 15 long years. She felt a strange mixture of amazement and tenderness, marveling at the intuition of a creature who, without words, understood the depths of her heart. Then it happened. The dog moved closer, resting his head gently on her lap, his eyes soft and unwavering. He nudged her hand again, this time pressing his nose against her palm as if to say, "I'm here. I see you. You matter." She felt a rush of emotion, the kind that comes unexpectedly, powerful and tender all at once. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness but from the sheer intensity of the moment. This simple gesture, so small in action but so large in meaning, was something she had longed for from her husband, something that hadn't touched her life for 15 years. She stroked his fur, feeling the warmth and life beneath her fingers. He pressed closer, leaning into her touch, and she whispered softly, "I needed this more than I realized." The dog responded with a soft, happy whine, as if acknowledging her words. She laughed through her tears, feeling a release of emotions she had held onto for years, the longing, the disappointment, the quiet hope that love could still be found in unexpected ways. The morning passed slowly, filled with small, intimate moments. The dog stayed close, circling around her, resting his head on her lap and nudging her hand whenever she paused. Every gesture carried a weight of meaning, a reminder that love could exist without words, without grand declarations, without years of routine that left space for distance. In his presence, she felt noticed, valued, and cherished in a way that was profoundly moving. She thought about her husband, sitting quietly in the house, absorbed in his routine. She didn't feel resentment or anger. Instead, she felt a quiet understanding. Love could be shown in different ways, and sometimes it came from unexpected sources. The dog's gentle actions today were teaching her that care, attention, and affection didn't need to be complicated. Sometimes, the simplest gestures could touch the heart more deeply than years of unspoken intentions. As the sun climbed higher, they walked through the garden together. The dog ran ahead, then returned, always keeping her in sight. He nudged her hand whenever she paused to admire the flowers or pick up fallen leaves. Each interaction felt deliberate, intentional, as if he were making sure she knew she was seen, loved, and appreciated. She felt a warmth in her chest, a growing sense of gratitude for the unexpected ways love had entered her life. At one point, she sat down on a bench under the shade of a tree, and the dog immediately came to rest his head on her shoulder. She leaned into him, closing her eyes for a moment, and felt a wave of calm wash over her. It was a serenity she hadn't felt in years, a feeling of being understood and valued without needing to ask for it. She whispered softly, "Thank you for this. I've missed it for so long." He responded with a soft, happy sigh, as if telling her it was his pleasure to be there. Time seemed to slow in these moments. The air was filled with the scent of earth and leaves, and the gentle rustle of branches overhead created a peaceful backdrop. The dog stayed close, attentive, and loving, offering the kind of connection that was rare and precious. She realized that these simple gestures, nudges, gentle touches, close presence, were more powerful than words or grand actions. They carried a depth of meaning that resonated in her heart. As the day continued, the dog's attentiveness did not waver. He followed her from room to room when they returned home, resting beside her whenever she paused. Each time he nudged her hand or leaned into her lap, she felt a wave of warmth and comfort. It was a reminder that love and care didn't always need to be dramatic or complicated. Sometimes it simply needed to be present, consistent, and thoughtful. In the afternoon, she paused to reflect on the years that had passed. 15 years of marriage had been filled with routine and quiet distance. Small gestures of care from her husband had become rare, and the affection she had once expected had faded into polite interactions. And yet, here was her dog, offering the very thing she had longed for in its simplest, purest form. It struck her as both ironic and beautiful, how a creature with no words could express love so clearly, so fully, and so profoundly. As evening approached, the dog remained unusually close. He curled up at her feet as she prepared dinner, occasionally nudging her hand or resting his head on her lap when she paused. She noticed her husband observing them quietly, perhaps aware of the unusual intensity of the dog's behavior today, but she didn't need him to acknowledge it. The experience was hers alone, a moment of connection and love that filled a space in her heart that had long been empty. When the house grew quiet at night, she sat on the couch with the dog beside her, stroking his fur gently. He leaned into her touch, pressing his head against her shoulder, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about companionship, it was about being seen, being cared for, and being cherished. This simple gesture, repeated throughout the day, had touched her in a way she hadn't expected, and she held it close to her heart. She thought about the future, about how small acts of love could make a difference, even when years of routine had dulled expectations. The dog's care had reminded her that connection could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest gestures could carry the most profound meaning. She whispered softly, "I will never forget this day. I will cherish it always." The dog responded with a soft, contented sigh, resting his head against her gently, as if acknowledging her words. As she prepared for bed, the dog jumped up onto the bed beside her, curling up close. She held him gently, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in years, she felt fully cherished in a way that was tangible and real. It wasn't the love she had always imagined from her husband, but it was love nonetheless, consistent, pure, and deeply meaningful. In the quiet darkness of the night, she reflected on the day's events. The dog had given her something she had missed for 15 years, the feeling of being cared for, seen, and cherished. And though it had come from an unexpected source, it filled her heart with gratitude and joy. She drifted to sleep with him by her side, a warm, gentle reminder that love could exist in many forms, and sometimes it arrived in the smallest, most tender gestures. The next morning, she woke up feeling a little lighter than usual. There was a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet joy that lingered from yesterday. The dog was already awake, sitting at the foot of the bed, eyes bright and expectant. He wagged his tail the moment he saw her, as if to say, "Good morning. I'm here." She smiled, reaching out to stroke his fur, feeling the soft warmth under her hand. The simple act of being noticed and welcomed lifted her mood instantly. Her husband was still asleep, the familiar, steady presence in the house that was routine but distant. She didn't dwell on it today. Instead, she focused on the bond she shared with her dog. Over the past few days, she had realized just how meaningful his attention and care had become. It wasn't just about companionship anymore. It was about feeling understood and cherished in ways that had been missing for years. The dog had a way of sensing her emotions, her quiet longings, and he responded with gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. After breakfast, she decided to spend some time outside with him. The morning air was crisp and fresh, and the garden was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. The dog bounded ahead, full of energy, but kept glancing back to make sure she was following. There was a subtle intention in his actions today, a patience and attentiveness that made her heart swell. He seemed to understand that she needed more than playful antics. She needed reassurance, love, and presence. As they walked through the garden, she reflected on the years of her marriage. 15 years had passed, filled with routines and responsibilities, but often missing warmth and connection. Her husband loved her in his own quiet way, but he rarely expressed it in ways she could feel. He was dependable and steady, yes, but there had been a gap, a quiet space where affection and care had faded. Over time, she had learned to accept it, to adjust her expectations, and to find small joys elsewhere. The dog, she realized, had become a bridge over that empty space. His presence reminded her that love could come in many forms. It didn't always have to be words or grand gestures. Sometimes it was quiet, persistent, and tender. She watched him as he sniffed around the flowers, then returned to her side, nudging her hand with his nose as if checking that she was there and okay. Every small action was a gentle affirmation that she mattered, that she was seen, and that she was cared for. When they reached the clearing near the old oak tree, the dog paused, looking up at her with intent eyes. She knelt beside him, noticing his steady focus. He rested his head gently on her lap, nudging her hand as he had done yesterday. She felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of gratitude, surprise, and quiet joy. The consistency of his care had begun to shift something inside her. She realized that love didn't always have to be complicated or dramatic. Sometimes it was found in these simple, deliberate acts of attention. The day passed slowly, filled with small but meaningful interactions. The dog followed her wherever she went, sitting close when she paused, nudging her hand when she seemed lost in thought, and resting his head against her when she needed comfort. Each gesture was deliberate, a quiet language of care that she had come to understand and treasure. It amazed her how a creature could express such profound affection without words, simply through presence and intention. She began to notice a subtle change in herself. The sadness that had lingered in her heart for years seemed to soften. The longing she had carried for attention and affection from her husband was still there, but it was no longer painful. Instead, it was tempered by gratitude for the love she did have, the love of her dog, the steady presence that reminded her she was valued and cherished. She realized that happiness didn't always come from the people we expect it from. Sometimes it came from unexpected places, and sometimes it came in forms we hadn't considered. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, she sat on the porch with the dog at her side. He rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed in contentment. She stroked his fur slowly, savoring the moment. The quiet companionship was comforting, soothing a heart that had long felt the ache of distance. She reflected on the small ways she had learned to navigate life without the expressions of affection she had once expected. And yet, through the dog's consistent gestures, she realized she hadn't been alone. There had always been love, just in a different form than she had imagined. Her husband moved around the house, occasionally glancing her way, but she didn't need his acknowledgement. The dog's care was enough. The gestures he offered, simple nudges, attentive eyes, and gentle closeness, had begun to change her perspective. She realized that love didn't need to come with conditions, expectations, or declarations. It could simply exist in the quiet, in the consistent presence of someone or something that genuinely cared. As evening approached, she noticed the dog behaving in a slightly protective way. When she moved from the porch to the kitchen, he followed closely, staying near her, occasionally looking toward the door as if making sure everything was safe. She smiled, feeling a mix of amusement and appreciation. His attentiveness was more than playful. It was thoughtful, almost human in its intention. She realized that he had become more than a companion. He had become a source of emotional guidance, showing her how love could be simple, consistent, and deeply meaningful. Dinner was quiet. Her husband was occupied with reading, and the dog sat patiently beside her, resting his head on her foot. She felt a sense of gratitude for the small moments of connection, for the way the dog's presence had begun to reshape her understanding of care and attention. She thought about the years that had passed, about the distance that had grown between her and her husband. And yet she felt no bitterness. Instead, she felt clarity. She understood that love was not always about who we expected it from. Sometimes it came from the most unexpected sources, in the simplest acts and in the most subtle gestures. After dinner, she moved to the living room, the dog following her closely. He lay down beside her, resting his head on her lap, and she stroked him slowly. She thought about the little things she had missed over the years, the soft words, the gentle touch, the small signs of care, and realized that the dog had been offering them all along in his own way. Each nudge, each gentle push, each careful glance was a reminder that she mattered, that she was loved, and that she could still feel cherished. As night fell, she prepared for bed, and the dog jumped up beside her, curling close. She held him gently, feeling the warmth and comfort of his presence. Her heart felt lighter, her mind calmer, and her spirit more at peace than it had in years. The realization settled in her mind that love didn't always follow the path we expect. It could be found in loyalty, attentiveness, and gentle care, in ways that didn't require words or grand gestures. And in that understanding, she found a profound sense of peace and gratitude. She lay down, the dog resting his head on her shoulder, and she closed her eyes, reflecting on the day. The love she had been seeking for so long had come in an unexpected form. It hadn't been about her husband's actions. It had been about noticing, appreciating, and cherishing the small acts of care around her. The dog's gestures, consistent and intentional, had shown her a new way to experience love, one that didn't rely on expectation, one that was simple, pure, and deeply fulfilling. As she drifted to sleep, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She thought about the future, about the small moments that awaited her, and about the gratitude that had taken root in her heart. The dog's unwavering care had opened her eyes to a truth she had long overlooked, that love could exist in many forms, and that it could be just as powerful, meaningful, and cherished when it came quietly, persistently, and without expectation. The night was calm, filled with the gentle rhythm of breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. She held the dog close, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. In the quiet intimacy of the moment, she realized that the days ahead could be filled with these small, meaningful gestures, and that she could carry this understanding into her life, feeling love, care, and connection even when it came from unexpected places. And in that quiet, tender moment, she whispered softly, "Thank you for showing me that love can be simple, steady, and real." The dog gave a soft, contented sigh, resting his head against her, and she felt more than ever that she was cherished, not in the way she had expected, not in the way she had longed for, but in a way that was pure, sincere, and profoundly meaningful. And for the first time in a long while, she truly felt at peace with the love she had in her life. The next morning, she woke feeling a quiet sense of anticipation, though she couldn't put her finger on why. The house was bathed in soft sunlight, the air calm and fresh. Her dog was already awake, sitting patiently at the foot of the bed, tail wagging as he noticed her stirring. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, feeling the familiar warmth of his fur and the steady rhythm of his breathing. For a moment, she just breathed in the simplicity of the morning, feeling connected in a way that had been rare for years. Her husband was still asleep, as usual, immersed in the comfort of his routines. She no longer felt disappointment or longing toward him. She had learned that love came in many forms, and sometimes it arrived quietly, without the gestures she had once expected. Her dog had become the bridge over years of distance, reminding her that presence, attention, and care were all forms of love that could be cherished deeply. After breakfast, she decided to take a walk with her dog in the garden, following their usual path near the old oak tree. The dog bounded ahead with excitement, then returned frequently to check on her. Today, his actions were more intentional than ever. Each nudge, each glance, each playful hop carried a purpose, as if he knew she needed a reminder that she was cared for and loved. She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It amazed her how deeply she could feel connection from a simple creature who gave so freely of his attention. As they reached the clearing by the tree, the dog sat down and looked at her with bright, steady eyes. He rested his head gently on her lap, nudging her hand softly. She stroked his fur, feeling a surge of gratitude and love for him. Over the past few days, his small gestures had built something extraordinary in her heart, a sense of being seen, understood, and cherished in ways that words could never fully express. She thought back to the years of her marriage. 15 years had passed, filled with love that was often unspoken, hidden beneath routines and responsibilities. Her husband had always been dependable, but his gestures of care had grown rare and moments of affection had almost vanished. She remembered how it had felt in the early days, longing for a hug, a smile that lingered, or a gentle touch that showed he noticed her. Those things had faded, replaced by polite exchanges and practical interactions, and yet in the dog's presence she found a new way to experience that care. The dog nudged her hand again and she laughed softly, brushing the fur from his ears. "You've taught me so much without even trying," she whispered. He barked lightly, tail wagging, as if acknowledging her words. She realized that he had not only filled a void in her life, but he had also shifted the way she understood love. It didn't always have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes it